I didn't realize how much I'd changed until someone asked me a simple question, and I froze. They asked what I wanted, not what we wanted, not what made sense, just what I wanted. I couldn't answer. I'd been married for 7 years, and somewhere along the way my preferences stopped feeling relevant. I told myself that was compromise, maturity, but the truth was I'd learned that wanting the wrong thing led to long, exhausting conversations about why my desire was a real issue. She was calm in a way people admired, thoughtful, articulate, always reasonable. If I disagreed with her, she listened carefully and then explained why my perspective made sense emotionally, but not logically. That distinction mattered to her. Logic was authority. Emotion was something to be managed. Over time, I stopped pushing back. Not because I agreed, but because it was easier to let her win than to spend hours unpacking why I felt the way I did. Peace became conditional on my silence. The first signs weren't dramatic. She started saying things like, "You're taking this very personally," or "That's not what I meant, but I see why you feel that way." It sounded validating, but it always ended with my feelings being gently set aside. She also became more private, not secretive, just selective. Conversations she used to have with me started happening elsewhere. She'd come home lighter, more energized, while I felt strangely disconnected. When I mentioned it, she smiled and said I was imagining distance that wasn't there. I found out by accident, the way most truths seem to surface when you're not looking. I was borrowing her phone to check a delivery when a message came in. Not explicit, just intimate, familiar, the kind of tone you don't use with a stranger. My chest tightened, but I still tried to rationalize it. When I asked her about it, she didn't deny it. She sighed and said she'd hoped I was more secure than this, that it wasn't cheating. It was emotional support she didn't feel safe asking me for. The confrontation didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a lecture. She explained how my reactions had made it hard for her to be honest, how she needed someone who could listen without collapsing. My hurt, apparently, was evidence of my unfitness to handle the truth. I remember thinking how strange it was that her betrayal had turned into a lesson about my shortcomings. That was the moment something clicked. I wasn't being asked to heal. I was being asked to adapt, quietly, so everything could stay exactly the way she wanted it. The days after that conversation felt heavier than I expected. Not louder, not angrier, just heavier. She moved through the house like everything had been clarified, like we'd reached some enlightened understanding. I felt like I was carrying a weight I couldn't put down. Every time I tried to talk about it, she'd say we were revisiting the same emotional loop. She suggested journaling, meditation, anything that didn't involve her changing her behavior. It was subtle but clear. My discomfort was now a solo project. The first real twist came when I realized she'd already reframed our story for other people. A friend asked me if I was doing okay lately, in that careful tone people use when they already think they know the answer. I later found out she'd told them I'd been struggling emotionally for a while, that she was trying to support me through a difficult phase. It wasn't a lie exactly, but it wasn't the truth either. It positioned her as patient and me as fragile. Any reaction I had now would only confirm that version. I asked her if she was still talking to him. She said yes, but only when she needed perspective. When I said that hurt, she said I was asking her to isolate herself emotionally. She framed my boundary as a demand, my pain as pressure. She asked why I couldn't just trust her. I wanted to ask how trust was supposed to grow when I was the last to know anything, but I already knew how that conversation would go, so I stayed quiet. And that silence, she later told me, felt like punishment. Another twist surfaced quietly. I noticed she started keeping notes about conversations, about things I'd said. When I brought it up, she said she was trying to track patterns. When I disagreed with her memory of an argument, she'd pull out her phone and quote me back to myself, slightly altered. I started doubting my recollection. I began writing things down too, not to win arguments, but to make sure I wasn't losing my grip on reality. That scared me more than the affair ever did. The moment I stopped explaining myself, everything shifted. Her calm began to crack. She accused me of shutting down, of emotionally withdrawing. The same behavior she once praised as measured was suddenly framed as cold and unfair. Watching that switch flip was clarifying. It showed me the rules had never been about communication or growth. They were about predictability. As long as I stayed easy to manage, everything stayed peaceful. The moment I wasn't, the peace disappeared. Leaving didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happened in a series of small decisions where I chose not to explain myself anymore. I realized I was more exhausted by constant self-translation than I was afraid of being alone. When I told her I needed space, she said I was running from growth, that I was abandoning her when she was being honest for the first time. I didn't argue. I packed a bag and stayed with friend. The quiet that night felt unsettling, but also steady. My thoughts didn't need defending. They were just thoughts. The messages came quickly after I left. Some were reflective, almost gentle. Others were disappointed, sharp around the edges. She said she didn't recognize me anymore, that I'd changed. She was right, but not in the way she meant. Friends I trusted finally heard the full story. A few admitted they'd noticed how often I second-guessed myself around her. One said, "You always sounded like you were asking permission." Hearing that out loud was painful and relieving. It made something click that I'd been circling for years. Therapy didn't give me answers right away. It gave me language. I talk about the affair, but more about how every disagreement ended with me questioning my own reactions. My therapist pointed out how often I described myself using her words: overly sensitive, reactive, difficult. When asked if those labels felt true outside the relationship, they didn't. That realization hurt more than I expected. It meant I wasn't broken. I'd been adapting. Grieving the marriage also meant grieving how long I'd ignored myself to keep things calm. When we finally talked about separating, it was strangely composed. She said she hoped one day I'd understand what she'd been trying to teach me, that she wished I were more open-minded. I didn't push back. I told her I needed a relationship where honesty didn't come with conditions, and where my emotions weren't treated like problems to solve. She looked disappointed, like I'd missed an important lesson. For the first time, that disappointment didn't move me at all. If you're reading this and something in your relationship feels quietly exhausting rather than supportive, pay attention, especially if your feelings are constantly being reframed or corrected. Love shouldn't require you to disappear to keep things peaceful. Leaving wasn't empowering in a dramatic way. It was quiet, frightening, and stabilizing. I didn't walk away because I stopped loving her. I walked away because I started trusting myself again. And if clarity feels like a threat to your relationship, that might already be your answer.